CKNW News Talk 980, BC's news leader. It's 8:30. The Bill Good Show presents Provincial Election 2013, the exclusive radio leaders debate. Watch the debate live at CKNW.com. Now, here is your host, Bill Good.
Good morning. Welcome to the leaders debate in this 2013 election. Let me make a few opening comments. We will hear from the leaders of each of the four main parties. Each will make an opening statement of about 1 minute. I will have questions of each candidate, but my job is to facilitate the debate, not to interrogate. I have had that opportunity in recent days. Today I am more of a traffic cop. The candidates had their names drawn in random fashion to determine the order of speaking, and when each has spoken, I will have some questions. Then after a short break at the top of the hour, we will open the phone from 9 until 10 to give as many of you as possible a chance to ask questions of the candidates, and I will endeavor to make sure each candidate has a fair opportunity to be heard or to make their case. And let me begin by asking Ms. Clark to make her opening statement. And each of the candidates is in literally the last 10 seconds been seated in the studio. So good morning to all of you, and thank you for being here. Ms. Clark.
Good morning, Bill. They wanted us to take a picture out front, so we took a few minutes extra to get in. I do want to thank you very much, and CKNW, for having us this morning. I want to thank your listeners for tuning in, and I want to thank all of my fellow party leaders for taking the time off the campaign trail to be here. When I became Premier 2 years ago, I decided I was going to work hard to try and protect our economy and protect it from the risk that is surrounding British Columbia in very turbulent economic times. And that plan is working. We raised the minimum wage, we've held the line on taxes, and we are very much controlling government spending. And now we are going to freeze income taxes, balance the budget, freeze the carbon tax, and put us on a path to a debt-free British Columbia for our kids and for our grandkids. And I've said many times that this election is a clear choice. It's a very stark choice, in fact, between the two parties that have a possibility of becoming government. Do we keep going forward, or do we go backward? I believe British Columbians want a government that's going to empower them, a government that believes in them, a government that believes that if we leave more money in their pockets, that they will make better choices about how to spend it. And in this election, the choice is between a government that believes in your ability to make the best decisions with your money and a government that would take more of that money away and decide that they can make better decisions than you can. So I think British Columbians deserve to know exactly where we all stand on these issues, and I'm delighted to be here today with you, Bill, so that they can hear a little bit about that.
John Cummins is next, the leader of the BC Conservative Party. Mr. Cummins.
Well, thank you, Bill, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. When I came to British Columbia as a young man to work on the WAC Bennett Dam, BC was the place to be. We led the country in every way. This was the best place to work, to play, and to raise a family. In fact, it was so good I stayed here to do just that. Between working construction, teaching, owning and operating a couple of fishing boats, and being a member of Parliament, I raised my family and enjoyed all that BC has to offer. But somewhere along the line, things started to change. Things are becoming more and more complicated over the past 20 years. Bigger government, higher spending, increasing taxes. British Columbia families are getting left behind. I don't want my children and grandchildren to get left behind in a province that gave me so much. So let's stop complicating things. Let's get BC back to basics. Balanced budgets, smarter spending, and low taxes. Simple solutions that will help families and once again make BC the best place to be.
Adrian Dix, leader of the NDP.
It's great to be here, Bill. Great to be here with my three fellow leaders, all of whom I respect. Their commitment to BC is real, and I'm hoping we have a good debate. Really, the choice in this election is whether we have more of the same 12 years of Liberal government, or whether we have change for the better. Change for the better means addressing our key economic issues, such as skills training, ensuring young people have the jobs they need, the opportunities and skills they need for the jobs of the future. Change for the better means addressing poverty directly by ensuring that especially children don't have to live any longer in poverty. Change for the better means addressing climate change and ensuring we make decisions right here in BC about pipelines. Change for the better means saying what you're going to do and saying how you're going to pay for it. That's the NDP plan. That's going to be the NDP plan for 4 years, and I hope I can count on people's support.
Jane Sterk, leader of the Green Party.
Good morning, Bill. I want to thank you and CKNW for offering this debate. I think this is a really critical debate because what it does is it invites the people into the discussion about what they want for British Columbia. And I don't know about the other leaders. I'm pretty sure that they're getting thousands of emails a day from British Columbians who are asking about ideas about healthcare, about the economy, about our social services, about democratic reform. For the last 20 or 30 years, we've seen a kind of two-party system in British Columbia that goes back and forth and that is based in a belief that we have to be antagonistic with one another. The Green Party offers a different way, a different philosophy of government, a different philosophy of politics. We believe that we could work across party lines in a collaborative, cooperative manner to deal with the very serious problems that we face in British Columbia. The Green Party proposes that we move to strong local economies, that we have efficient government, and that we put people and the places they live at the center of all of our thinking so that we can have healthy people in healthy places. I look forward to this debate with my fellow leaders. I think we'll have great ideas put out, and I think the people of British Columbia can make a decision about how they want to shape the next legislature, whether they want to continue that two-party antagonistic kind of system or whether they want a constructive alternative that brings a watchdog voice into the legislature.
You've heard from each of the party leaders. In the next few minutes, there'll be some questions from me, an opportunity for the leaders to respond to any of the questions that I raise. And then at the top of the clock, we'll take a very short break for a news headline. Then we'll come back and we'll open the phones and give you an opportunity to speak with each of the leaders. I would ask you to be reasonably concise, to try to direct your questions to a specific candidate. If you do, I will try to make sure that that candidate responds to you, but I'll give the other leaders an opportunity to speak as well. And if you don't select a candidate, I will do so for you. But first to Ms. Clark. You've been Premier for 2 years. What would you point to as an accomplishment or legacy?
Well, let's start with controlling spending. I became Premier 2 years ago, Bill, and I said I inherited a deficit, and I said we are going to get government spending under control. We've done it. We have better control of government spending than any other province in the country by a long shot. And then I said, all right, now we've got government spending under control. We're going to balance the budget. We did that. And now that we've balanced the budget, we are in a position to put our province on the path to a debt-free BC. But it all starts with controlled spending. And you can't build a province, you can't build an economy, you can't protect British Columbia from what's going on out there if you get into the kind of out-of-control spending that we've seen some of my opponents in this campaign promise already. The only way to a debt-free BC is a balanced budget. And the only way to a balanced budget is controlled government spending. $3 billion in 9 days will not get you to any of those places.
To John Cummins, your party would be considered right of centre or free enterprise. So how would you differ from the Liberals?
Well, I think I would challenge Ms. Clark on the fact that this government has controlled spending. It simply hasn't. Debt in British Columbia doubled under the NDP in the 90s, and it's doubled again under the Liberals. In fact, under Ms. Clark's tutelage, the debt in British Columbia has increased by $11 billion. I think what we need is, and of course the books have not been balanced. What we need to do is make a commitment to getting spending under control, and that simply hasn't happened under this government, and I wouldn't expect it would happen under an NDP government.
Adrian Dix, how would you deal with spending? You've laid out some pretty specific plans, about $2.5 billion over 3 years. How would you generate the revenue to pay for the health care and education and training that you've promised?
We were specific. Before the election, we said where all of the money would come from, which I think is a change from a government that before the last election said it wasn't going to bring in the HST, then did. I think it's important to learn from the mistakes of other governments. What we've done, we said clearly where the money would come from. We are going to raise the corporate income taxes, as is Premier Clark, to 12%, which is to return them to 2008 levels. We're going to reinstate a minimum tax on the big banks. We're going to ensure that on income over $150,000, so no income tax increases for 98% of the population, we're going to raise income taxes for income over $150,000 specifically, and we're going to ensure that the natural gas industry pays the carbon tax for venting, just like you and I do on emissions on our cars.
A question for Jane Sterk. You lead a party that's never elected a member of the legislature. Why should people vote Green?
Well, people should vote Green because we offer a very different vision for the future of British Columbia. We are facing several crises that we need to be aware of. The first is the climate crisis. The second is we have a crisis in our economy. We cannot continue a growth-based economy that is fueled by cheap fossil fuels and debt. We know that worldwide we're seeing the limits of that economy. And so we have to rethink how British Columbia can go forward so we create a viable economy for both our kids and our grandkids. We know that our social services are under stress. They're not delivering service where people live when they need it and the quality of service that people expect. And so the Green Party offers great ideas in all of these areas. We're fresh and new and creative, and we're the only party actually that has 30 years of policy making that we have available for people all the time on our website, and that provides a clear direction for a different kind of future for British Columbia.
Ms. Clark, to you in terms of managing the debt, you talked about keeping government spending down, but you're also talking about becoming debt-free. Is that viable? Is that realistic? Is that believable?
Bill, there's only one way you get there. It's if you balance your budget, and we've done that. We have balanced the budget in British Columbia, and we have 3 years of surpluses ahead of us, and you can't get there if you do what Mr. Dix is promising, which is never to balance the budget, to throw out the balanced budget law that would require him to take a pay cut if he doesn't balance the budget. You have to start there, and then you have to build a natural gas industry in British Columbia that will change our economy forever. And so while we have a clear plan here on my side of the fence, what Mr. Dix would do is change his mind every day, obscure his policies on this, and hide where he really wants to go. At least Ms. Sterk is very clear about where she stands on liquefied natural gas. She's principled. She opposes it. Mr. Dix changes his positions every day, and you can't build an economy with those kinds of things. It's really the same old NDP. They want to grow government, and they want to shrink the private sector economy. I want to go in the other direction.
Part of our format gives each of you an opportunity to rebut what has been said in opening comments. So to Mr. Cummins, an opportunity to respond.
Well, I think that this whole idea of a balanced budget is certainly what everyone strives for. The reality is quite different. Ms. Clark mentioned balanced budget legislation. Well, we've had a series of balanced budget legislations introduced going back to the Social Credit Government in 1990. Their balanced budget legislation was killed by the NDP, who introduced their own near the end of their mandate. It was killed by the Liberals and introduced a couple of times, including pay cuts for ministers if they didn't achieve the goal of balancing the budgets in ministries. It hasn't been successful. We've had 6 surpluses and 17 deficits since the first ballot budget legislation was introduced. Folks are talking the talk, but they're not walking the walk.
Mr. Dix.
Bill, the only person in BC who thinks the budget is balanced is Premier Clark. The fact of the matter is the Premier has been in power for 2 years, and she took over from Premier Campbell. In the first year, the rate of growth of government spending went up. In the second year, the rate of growth of government spending went up. In the year we're in, which is what happened, not what they're promising in a campaign, but what happened. What happened was they missed their deficit target. So I think it's wrong to take an approach to these issues that simply lays out campaign slogans. Balancing the budget is hard work. You need a plan to do it. You need to move towards it. It's not trying to pretend to sell assets in an election year that you get there. You get there through hard work. That's why we're saying what we're going to do, and we're saying how we're going to pay for it in our plan.
I'm going to come back to you on that, but first I must give Ms. Sterk an opportunity to rebut the opening comments.
Well, my sense is that we're talking numbers that don't make any sense to British Columbians. People are talking about balanced budgets when we grow the debt. It doesn't compute for most people. We're talking about digging up British Columbia and selling it to China as our route forward to a healthy economy. We know that we're in trouble in terms of our ability to manage our money. We know that if we really want to be fiscally conservative, we're going to match our revenues to the expenditures that British Columbians expect. British Columbians have priorities for what they want their government to be involved in. They don't want to create jobs in one region of the province at the exclusion of jobs in other regions of the province. They want us to be creating jobs in Kamloops so people can stay in Kamloops, so that a pipe fitter doesn't have to go up to Kitimat in order to get a job. And so all of this discussion about who's best, it's not dealing with the reality of British Columbia, that we need a different way of thinking about how we're going to move forward if we're going to create real jobs for real people in the communities where they live.
I want to come back to John Cummins, because you have talked about the importance of balancing a budget, but you've also talked about getting rid of the carbon tax. You've talked about reducing taxes. How can you possibly reduce taxes, get rid of a carbon tax, and grow enough revenue in order to balance a budget? How can that be done?
Well, when we talk about getting rid of the carbon tax, we also talk about eliminating the two tax credits that were introduced at the same time, and that's revenue. The second point is that we've indicated that our agenda would be to hold the fall session of the legislature on an annual basis, but that fall session of the legislature would be dedicated to examining the books of the government, the ministries, the Crown Corporation, and the so-called such sector, the schools, universities, colleges, and hospitals. We would divide the legislature into 3 committees, and those committees would be empowered to call as witnesses the CEOs, CFOs, and deputy ministers and others to appear before them and justify their spending. We think that that's important. If you consider the report that came out on ICBC at the end of the summer last year, the government said they had no idea that the number of people earning over $200,000 went from about 13 or 14 up to over 50. In fact, that was reported every year, and ICBC's report to the government is required under the Financial Information Act. We need to be examining the books of those government agencies if we're going to balance the books, and I think we can do that. I think that will keep spending under control. Ms.
Clark, you've been furiously making notes.
Well, I was thinking about, I was doing the numbers a little bit. Mr. Cummins' budget has promised a 30% increase in government spending, and I was just thinking about the fact, Mr. Cummins, you voted NDP in the last election, so it's not that surprising you would want to introduce an NDP budget. But beside you is the man who hopes to be premier and who has introduced so far $3 billion worth of new spending in the last 9 days. It is the same old NDP. Big unions, big special interests, big taxes, big debt. And the difference between us is this. Instead of believing in those things, I believe in a big economy. I believe in low taxes, and I believe in controlling government spending. And so in this election campaign, people will have a choice between 2 people who could serve as premier and lead a government. And one of us believes in a big economy, and one of us believes in big government. $3 billion worth of spending, that comes from somewhere. And it comes from people's pockets in higher taxes, and it comes from a shrinking economy that means our kids are going to have to go to Alberta to find work.
Mr. Dix, it comes at a time when you have also indicated that you would not approve the Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion. So I'm wondering where you get the revenue to do the kinds of things that you want to do.
Well, I believe very strongly that the BC economy has to grow. That doesn't mean we don't do other things. I think the idea that we don't address education or healthcare or other things, which is really the Premier's plan, until sometime in the 2020s is not the way we need to go. We need to grow a forest industry, which means a long-term view, ensuring that we understand what's going on the land and that we're replanting to ensure prosperity in the future. Mostly we need to invest in skills training. When I meet people in manufacturing and forestry and mining and natural gas, they say there's a significant skill shortage that's limiting prosperity. And government's job is to address that skill shortage. And that is a major difference between ourselves and the Liberals. We have a plan to address skills training, and the Liberal government has been advertising about skills training, including on CKNW, but cutting the budget. That's a strong difference. I think that's a path to prosperity.
I was watching the news last night, and in response to your decision to not support Kinder Morgan's expansion, and I believe the numbers were, at the moment there are about 8 oil tanker ships going out of our harbor every month. Under Kinder Morgan's plan, that number would increase to 34. And I wondered if you're allowing 8, what's the difference between 8 and 34. If it's safe for 8 ships to go out of the harbor, what's the difference between 8 and 34?
Well, it makes our coast, which is vital to our economy and our environment, especially in Metro Vancouver, but everywhere in BC, it makes our coast vulnerable. And I think that we don't want to transform this coast, Metro Vancouver, this port, into an oil tanker port. This will do that. It changes the purpose of the existing Kinder Morgan pipeline, and I've made it clear what our position is.
But you also made it clear back in October that you would wait until after what you called a proper environmental review and said that was a principled position. You've clearly changed your position.
Well, Kinder Morgan still has to, of course, apply, and that's the difference between Enbridge Northern Gateway and Kinder Morgan. But what I'm saying is clearly now where I stand, that I don't think that this harbor, that this port, should become an oil tanker export port. The Premier is unsure about that. I'm clear.
Well, Mr. Dix is not clear, Bill. He's not clear. And he's taken a different position on Kinder Morgan every week, it seems. And I would say this, it's really, there's the issue itself, but then there's the larger issue. Mr. Dix said he was going to stand on principle on this. And then a few days later, he threw away his principles and admitted he'd made his decision to change his mind in January, but he'd been concealing that from British Columbians for months. And to me, that suggests a pattern of behavior, Mr. Dix. You conceal your position on Kinder Morgan for months. You conceal your platform and what you want to do on the issues that matter to British Columbians for months. And if you're concealing those things from us, what else are you keeping from us? What else are you saying you're going to wait and tell us after the election? People need to know where each of us stand, and that's why I released my platform in full, costed in full, 80 pages, the day before the election started.
Bill, it's simply not true.
In terms of format, Ms. Sterks get a chance to respond, and then I'll come back to Adrian Dix.
I'd actually like to hear whether the NDP is for or against Kinder Morgan, yes or no? Because what I read and what I hear is that they're going to put it to an environmental assessment, a provincial environmental assessment, and that it's the tankers through the Vancouver harbor that's the problem. So they would be quite comfortable if the line goes down to the U.S. And so I think that what I'm hearing is really an election ploy to say that we're against Kinder Morgan because that's what their NDP base wants and that's what most British Columbians want. But I don't really hear that they're against Kinder Morgan. I just hear that they're against tanker traffic, increased tanker traffic in the Vancouver harbor.
Well, just to respond, what we're going to do is specific. There's an agreement, an equivalency agreement that the Liberal Party signed, the Liberal government signed, that said whatever Ottawa decides is our decision on these pipelines. I disagree with that. In the first 7 days, and I've said this for a long time, the first 7 days of coming to office, we would get out of that equivalency agreement. But I don't hear from Premier Clark, frankly. I mean, I'm interested that her position is clear. I don't hear her position on whether she wants to see more oil tankers out of the Port of Vancouver or not. If this is the argument, I mean, I know that the Liberal Party's whole campaign every day is attack, rinse, repeat. That's all they do is attack the NDP. We've put forward every day detailed policy proposals and said how we'd pay for them. I think that's a contrast people like. They like our positive campaign. All they hear from the Liberals is attack, attack, attack after 12 years of government.
I want to give Mr. Cummins an opportunity to speak to this.
Well, I think that this issue of tanker traffic and the position that the NDP have taken is simply unreasonable. As you suggest, there's about 8 ships are coming in each month, and it's going to increase to 30-some. The fact of the matter is when those ships come into Vancouver Harbor, all other traffic stops. There are 2 pilots aboard. There hasn't been an incident in 60 years. There are tankers that are coming into the Straits of Juan de Fuca almost on a daily basis from Alaska, feeding the refinery south of the border. The fact is, again, that and with Enbridge too, that the proposal is that each of those tankers that would be coming in the northern route would be accompanied by 2 huge towboats that have the capacity to turn, almost to tie that tanker in knots if they had to. They got the power to do it. You've got 2 eyes, 2 pilots on board the tanker. You've got 2 or 3 eyes on each of those towboats. The fact is that it's a safe way to move oil, and to suggest otherwise is simply irresponsible and untrue.
Am I right in saying that you are the only leader and the only party that is in favor of both Enbridge and Kinder Morgan?
Absolutely. I mean, that Kinder Morgan has been coming into Vancouver for about 60 years, essentially without incident. One incident where a backhoe operator lost the pipe or the location of the pipe. The technology has improved tremendously since that time. The ability to examine the pipes and ensure that the pipes are not close to fracture or wearing is huge. We've got technology that we didn't have 60 years ago. Moving oil by pipeline is simply the safest way to do it.
Let me ask each of the other leaders to clarify their position on the Enbridge Northern Pipeline. Ms. Clark.
You bet. I stood up for British Columbia when I went to Halifax. All the other premiers said to me, you know what? We don't like your position on the 5 conditions. And I said, there's no one else at this table whose job it is to stand up for the people of British Columbia. So those 5 conditions are consistent and they are clear. We're not changing them every day. We're not coming up with a different proposal like Mr. Dix is every week, or changing our mind and then concealing the reality from the public, as Mr. Dix has admitted to doing. The 5 conditions apply to the proposed Black refinery, to the Northern Gateway, or to any expansion of Kinder Morgan. And I think one of the other questions here is Mr. Dix says his position is clear. He wants to protect our coast. Well, what is Delta on our coast? If they want to expand Kinder Morgan out through Delta, isn't that part of the Canadian coast? This whole position of his that changes every day is about as clear as mud, and I think British Columbians really need to know where all of us stand on the issues. We know where Mr. Cummins stands. We know where Ms. Sterk stands. British Columbians know very clearly where I stand. But for Mr. Dix, it's a different position every day depending on what the polls and the politics tell him to do.
Mr. Dix.
I think it's extraordinary from a government that has behaved as this government has to be talking about polls and politics. They've been running negative ads for 18 months. That's their whole campaign. I've been clear on the question of Enbridge Northern Gateway. I told the Joint Review Panel what our position is. The Premier's position is that if you give us enough money, we might approve it, that we'd put our environment and our economy on the line for that. I don't agree with that. I think some things are too valuable to sell. That's why I've said that we are against, for economic and environmental interests, Enbridge Northern Gateway. Lots of people are in favor of economic development in BC and opposed to that proposal. The Haisla First Nation voted 87% against LNG, in favor of LNG, which I support, which others support, which the Premier supports. They oppose Enbridge Northern Gateway, not because they're opposed to economic development, because they think it hurts their local economy. That's their position. It's certainly mine.
Ms. Sterk.
The Green Party is not in favor of either the Kinder Morgan or the Enbridge pipeline. There are many reasons for that. Some of them are environmental. The fact that it will cross 700 salmon-bearing rivers and streams. There will be spills. This will be very catastrophic to our environment. There are economic reasons, and the biggest reason of all is that we need to get ourselves off fossil fuels. The longer we invest in fossil fuels, the longer we make that our economy, the less likely we will develop the clean tech energy industry that British Columbia could be.
Mr. Cummins, I have 30 seconds left before a break.
Well, I think that to suggest somehow that we shouldn't be allowing the export of these fossil fuels simply doesn't make sense. It's money in British Columbians' pockets, it's tax dollars, it's jobs, and it can be done safely, and I think that the record is very clear on that. And as well, as I say, the technology that's monitoring those pipes is just beyond question.
Short break, and then we come back with your call. 604-280-9898, toll free, 1-877-399-9898.
Right now, get a quality, reliable Honda Civic DX for just $95 bi-weekly with $0 down. Great news. The only problem is that you're likely in your car. For your personal safety, please refrain from in-vehicle belly bumping, backflipping, or doing that ridiculous horse riding lasso twirling dance. Just visit Kingsway Honda at Kingsway and 12th or visit kingswayhonda.ca for details.
Destination Auto Group. Your journey begins here.
Hi, it's Mark Madriga, and service is a very important part of any purchase decision. When you're happy with a service, you're happier with your purchase. That's where Trail Appliances really shines. When you choose Trail for your appliances, you'll get to experience Trail's legendary customer service and superior product knowledge. Better service and advice you can trust. That's the Trail promise. Choose Trail Appliances because we stand behind every appliance we sell. Trail Appliances throughout BC.
Gas prices are going down. For Hyundai drivers, that is. Right now, get up to 40 cents off a liter of gas until 2014 and 0% financing for up to 84 months on select models. The Hyundai Double Savings event is on now, but only for a limited time. Details at Destination Hyundai Vancouver. They're near 12th and Kingsway, or at destinationhyundai.ca.
Destination Auto Group. Your journey begins here.
Good morning, I'm Tom Mark. One man remains in serious condition, another in police custody after a stabbing last night at 141 A Street in Surrey. Police say the men know each other but haven't said what they argued about. It's not been determined what started a fire that destroyed 2 homes in Maple Ridge overnight. Neighbors say one of the homes at 221st and Lougheed housed a marijuana grow-op at one time. The federal government ran a surplus of $1.6 billion for February, slightly better than last year's $1.5 billion in the same month. TransCanada Corporation is revising its estimate of when its Keystone XL pipeline will likely be in service. It has pushed the date back to the second half of 2015. And hard-living country singer George Jones died early today in Nashville at the age of 81. Next news, when it happens, I'm Tom Mark.
You're listening to Provincial Election 2013, the exclusive radio Leaders Debate. Watch the debate live at CKNW.com. Once again, here is Bill Good.
We are back. It is the Leaders Debate, and we are going to take as many of your calls as we can. We are going commercial-free between now and 10 o'clock, so we will get to as many calls as we can. If you would like to direct your question to one of the candidates, please do so, and then I will try in as fair a fashion as possible to give each of the candidates, not necessarily every candidate to every question, but I'll try to, as fairly as possible, distribute the time to respond to your calls. And Tracy, we begin with you.
Hi, Bill. I just want to know how they feel about transparency in government, because I hear stories about the $30 million uranium debacle where the government had to got sued and had to give it back, and the $187 million computer glitch problem with the, it just goes on, and it just seems that none of this is being brought up about what goes on behind the scenes.
Let me ask Adrian Dix to start with that. We will give each of the candidates a chance on this particular question.
Well, the caller Tracy speaks to some specific problems. Obviously, the Boss Power deal was mishandled by the Liberal government. It costs us a lot of money. The computer systems and the Ministry of Children and Families, which are pretty important systems, have not succeeded and cost us a lot of money, been way over. We had to abandon the BC East's computer system. Again, costs us a lot of money. Overruns on the Convention Centre and BC Place Stadium. These are serious issues. I think government needs to go to work. I mean, in the last year, since last May, the legislature has sat for 19 days since it adjourned last May. That means the government has been out campaigning instead of doing its job. I think we need a spring session of the legislature, a fall session of the legislature, that the government should be accountable in question period, accountable in the legislature, not running and hiding, but standing in the legislature and responding to questions. It will lead to better accountability. We also have to ensure an end to wasteful practices like the government ads that have been running incessantly for months. And we are going to bring in legislation to end taxpayer-funded partisan ads. $16 million the Liberals have spent on it. It's way too much.
Ms. Clark.
Well, look, in the last 2 years, we've been working hard to balance the budget, first of all, get government spending under control, which we've done, develop an incredible liquefied natural gas opportunity, all so we can grow the economy. Because when we grow the economy, that is what allows us to look after people. And, in terms of transparency...
You're not speaking to transparency.
Well, in terms of transparency, we've put huge numbers of data sets out the door so that people can go on the internet anytime and look at what their government's doing. We've won awards for that since I've become Premier because we've done more of it than anyone else. On transparency, though, look at this campaign. I launched our platform fully costed the day before the election started. And in the meantime, we have over here the same old gang at the NDP concealing where they stand, hiding it from British Columbians, putting out a platform in the middle of the campaign that's only half costed and that looks like it was put together on the back of a couple of napkins. They're telling us, I believe, that we're going to see what they want to do after the election. That is not transparency. People in this campaign have a right, I think, to know where all the leaders stand so that they can make a clear choice in what I think is going to be one of the most important elections we've had in decades.
Mr. Dix, I challenged you on this yesterday. The fact that you're, after 10 or 12 years of watching, you still can't tell us what you're going to do with BC Ferries or with BC Hydro, for example. You've launched reviews. It's review. It's not, this is what we're going to do.
Well, when the Premier became Premier, Premier Clark became Premier, they launched 70 reviews. So this is sometimes practice in government. We said clearly what we're going to do on key issues, skills training, K-12 education, jobs. We've said clearly on other issues like BC Place Stadium that we're going to look for innovative solutions. I mean, the Premier and the government went over budget for $150 million on that project. They failed on a naming rights issue that was frankly bungled in the Premier's office. We know that. They failed on the gaming deal that they wanted to use to pay for it. I mean, I don't think by May 14th there'll be any napkins left in the Premier's office.
Mr. Dix, you're not sounding very positive.
Let me go to Mr. Cummins on this to get to, what would you do, for example, with BC Ferries?
Well, and with BC Ferries, of course, we announced a short-term measure, and that is a tax credit for frequent users of the ferries. But what we do believe is that this experiment, if you will, in privatization that's BC Ferries has undergone for the last number of years that was introduced by this Liberal government simply has been a failure. All that's been that's resulted from it is some executives making extremely high wages, including $1 million a year of Mr. Hahn. It's simply not working. We think that BC Ferries should revert to government control. There should be one board monitoring BC Ferries, not three. And then I think what we have to do is take a good look at the fares on BC Ferries. Passenger rates and traffic is a way down. There has to be a balance between passenger traffic and the fares.
So would you further subsidize it?
If that's what it takes, then that's what it takes. If you want to grow the economy on BC on Vancouver Island, you're going to have a good ferry service. And as I say, obviously the level of that the fares are at now has discouraged traffic. We've got to find that happy balance.
Ms. Sterk.
I want to go back to Tracy's question, not to BC Ferries and the discussions that have gone on here, because nobody's answered her question. Are we as a government going to allow the people of British Columbia to know exactly what's going on? And we've seen a history that that's not happening. In the Premier's office, they're not keeping records of discussions that are having so that the people can't have access to information about those discussions. We know that in the legislature, the spending of our MLAs is not public information. And we know that this government has made all kinds of obligations on the part of British Columbians, and we don't know what those the cost of all those obligations are. The Green Party believes that we, the people, have a right to the information and that should be accountable and transparent. Green MLAs will go in. We'll find out what the situation is in terms of the fiscal situation in British Columbia. We'll report that back out to British Columbians because we think they have a right to know.
Ed, good morning.
Morning, Bill. I have two quick questions. One, Kinder Morgan pipeline in its current state is 60 years old. My concern, and I am pro-business all the way, but my concern is that pipeline is 60 years old. If that thing blows anywhere along the line, if it develops serious issues, I'm very concerned. The new pipeline will have new technology to take care of earthquakes and everything else, but the old pipe, that wasn't built when they had all that technology. And the second question, what are each of the candidates going to do to show the general public that you are going to look in your own backyard before you start looking to cut elsewhere? I mean, gold-plated pensions, all the office costs that Ms. Clark took on where she fired people, all the severance pay that she must have had to pay out. It's just getting out of control.
Well, let me start on the pipeline question with Mr. Dix.
Well, I think it's of course very important that Kinder Morgan keeps its pipeline safe, and it is generally speaking done so, although there was a serious incident in Burnaby, as you know, a few years ago.
But they do upgrade on an ongoing
basis.
They
do upgrade on an ongoing basis. The question really is, do we want to transform the purpose of the pipeline? And I think we've had this discussion already. I've been pretty clear. I don't think we should. I don't think we should become an oil tanker export port. The Premier clearly disagrees, although she hasn't stated her position clearly. Premier clearly disagrees, and that's a reasonable subject for debate in the campaign. But I've tried to make my position clear right here, and not everyone will agree with that position, but I think it makes sense to ensure that our coast, which is so valuable to our economy, so valuable to our environment, is sustained.
Ed raises another issue, the constant turmoil and turnover in your office and about 200 people in communications in government. Is that necessary?
Well, it's sometimes, sadly, it's natural that it happens in government, and we have rules that we live by, and those set out how these things are managed. But I will say this: we are going to toughen up the balanced budget law. He says, look after it in your own backyard. Well, if we don't balance the budget, and if ministers don't balance their budget, they're going to get tougher penalties. Adrian Dix would throw that away, with Anne saying he wouldn't balance the budget. But I want to get back to the Kinder Morgan thing if I can, because, I have been clear on this. And I'm standing on the same principle that Mr. Dix said he was standing on for months, which is we should wait and see what the application is. Yes, it has to live up to has to meet the 5 conditions. But we have to see the application first. Mr. Dix said that was the principle he was standing on. The difference between us is I still stand on that principle. He changed his principles on that, jettisoned them when he saw the polls, and then told us he'd been concealing that from British Columbians for 5 months. So if he's concealing that, what about the labor code? What's he going to do to change the labor code? How is he going to pay for $3 billion in out-of-control spending?
I actually think this is the next question that's coming
from Bill, what the Premier just said just isn't true. And so I know that just because the Premier repeats it all the time doesn't make it true. I mean, when you make statements like that...
What wasn't true?
What wasn't true is that I've been concealing something for months. That's simply not true.
You said you made a decision in January.
I simply didn't say that. And I've said clearly when I made the decision, when I first spoke about it, was on Earth Day. That was clearly when I made the decision. But, this is what we get. After all these years of Liberal governments, when you're doing $16 million in government ads, people don't talk it back. When you say you're number one in Canada in job creation and government ads, people don't talk back. The reality is that we haven't had accountability. Ms. Sterk is absolutely correct. We need a legislature that sits and works, and the Premier has avoided debate in the legislature.
So will you commit to a spring and a fall sitting each and every year?
Yes.
Mr. Dix, were you misquoted by the Globe and Mail when Justine Hunter quoted you as saying you'd made this decision in January, but you only revealed it in April?
That simply isn't the case, and it's something that you keep repeating. You've repeated it 4 or 5 times. It simply isn't the case. And maybe I'll ask you because Bill just asked this question.
Okay.
Well, the statement wasn't enclosed. Bill just asked this question, so let's ask: are you committed to fall and spring sessions of the legislature? Will you support my bill to say no to the kind of waste and taxpayer-funded government ads we've seen for months from your government?
You know what, Mr. Dix? I'm not promising $3 billion worth of new spending. I mean, I know, it's easy to focus on parts of the platform, but where is the big platform from you? How are you going to pay for your $3 billion worth of new spending? I mean, when I hear what you're saying,
it's time for the referee to blow his whistle and get back to calls.
With the same old auto-control.
Stephen, good morning.
Good morning. Just wanted to ask Mr. Dix how he's intending on dealing with the unions in this upcoming round of negotiations, and really specifically, to ask him how does the economy work? Because from my perspective, the economy works by a big business, resources, energy, etc., basically generating revenues and jobs for individuals throughout the community, and those jobs to translate into further jobs, and the ability for the government to spend money. So I'm just wondering specifically how Mr. Dix is going to deal with the unions in these upcoming rounds of negotiations, and how he plans to spend all of this $2.5 billion when he's sending away businesses out of the province with regard to Kinder Morgan, with regard to all of these other, I'm against fracking, I'm against everything. And my concern is I'm 30 years old. Christy's right. John Cummins is right. I'm going to be heading out of the province if basically all we're doing is spending away my future. I've got 2 young kids, and I want to know how the unions are going to be dealt with.
Well, the economy works when we're creating jobs, and people in BC can get those jobs. They have the skills they need to get those jobs. And as you know, unions play a role in that process too. They have some of the most successful training programs in British Columbia. And I think what you need in an economy is yes, successful corporations, and yes, good jobs where people can support their families. And that's what we're going to fight for. With respect to the coming rounds of negotiations, we know we're inheriting a fiscal mess. We know the budget isn't balanced, so we're going to have to be prudent and keep the taxpayer in mind and ensure that everything we do is paid for, and that we do not expand the deficit. And that's why in this campaign,
LNG, because there are a lot of jobs that come through LNG, that come through the natural gas pipelines that are going to be required, not to mention the gas or the oil pipelines that you're denying.
I'm strongly supportive of LNG. We've consistently been strongly supportive of LNG. But, you know, to succeed in LNG, as Jim Prentice and many other people have pointed out, we have to ensure, because this was an issue in Australia, that we have adequate skills training. It doesn't make sense to do what the government has done, which is to advertise about skills training, but cut it. We need a plan to increase apprenticeships so that people in BC can benefit through good jobs from these projects, and that we can build these projects on time and on budget. That was an issue in Australia, and the decision to pursue economic development but undermine skills training is not the direction we would go.
Chris and Langley.
Hey guys, I love how Christy and Adrian have already in this conversation said that Jane is right. Jane, I'm sick of this negative campaigning and these two bickering back and forth. I'm sick of it. It's been going on too long. So I'd like to ask you, Jane, you said you're going to change the legislation and the government to a positive one. Sounds refreshing. I'd like you to give you a few minutes to explain to me and everybody how you're about to do that.
So the Green Party does not believe in the current in the strategy of other political parties, which is party discipline. It's called a whip system, which requires everybody within a party to vote and think the same way. And the Green Party believes that we could be a consensus-based caucus, that we could come together and think of good ideas, value the diversity of ideas that our members bring, and that out of that we could come to a position. If we're not able to come to a position, each of our individual members would be able to vote their principles and vote on behalf of their constituents. We want to reach out to our constituents to bring their ideas into the legislature. We have great ideas for doing that, using social media, using things like citizens' assemblies, so we can really understand what the people of British Columbia want. We believe in free votes in the legislature. We believe in working across party lines, bringing good ideas to the government, using the resources of the opposition and the government together to try and create a different culture within the legislature. Right now, when you look at question period, and I know that MLAs tell me that it's just show, it's just theater, it's embarrassing to think that we have this bickering back and forth, and that's what we call a democracy, that's what we call politics, that's what we call good government. And everybody knows that we don't have that.
Let me ask Mr. Dixon, because to be fair, you've never been in government. Mr. Dix has been a part of a government. Mr. Cummins has been part of a government. Ms. Clark is leading a government right now. Is it possible to run a government without a whipped system, to actually give your MLAs freedom to disagree with the leader?
I think it is.
I'm going to give everybody a chance.
Okay, I think it is possible to function without a whip system. I think you do have to have a coherent agenda when you make commitments in an election campaign. You need to deliver on those commitments. But absolutely, I think it's possible to give opportunities for people to hold a different view, that we need a better democracy now. One of the things I've tried to do since I've been leader of the NDP, we haven't run a single negative ad, not one negative ad, and there has been, I think you'll agree, Bill, a barrage from the Liberal Party. Not one negative ad. When the government does things we agree with, we say clearly that we agree with them. There are many good things the government has done over 10 or 12 years. There's some...
Name two.
Name two? Well, the Tsawwassen Treaty is an important change because it was a change in the way that the Liberal Party dealt with First Nations issues. It was an important change, and I think a good one. And because Mr. Campbell had been so against the Nisga'a Treaty, as had Ms. Clark, that change was important, and I recognize it. I think all-day kindergarten was a very good initiative by the current government. I could name more. So I think what you have to do, and what we need, is a politics where you build on the successes, because every government has successes, and every government has failures. Build on the successes, address the failures. And that's my approach, been my approach to opposition. It's why I don't run personal attack ads.
Let me go to John Cummins on this, because you were known as a maverick in the Conservative government. You came out of Reform, which gave individual MPs the right to speak out and to be independent? Can it be done on a provincial level?
Absolutely. As you suggest, my route was in the Reform Party, and there the mantra was that you put your constituents' interests ahead of the parties, and I believe that that should be the case. And you might, federally, you might add your province as well. The fact is that it can work. It works in Britain. In Britain, for example, Margaret Thatcher was defeated, I think, 13 times when she was a prime minister because her MPs voted against the government bill. At the end of the day, there was a call of confidence. The MPs get back on side, but Prime Minister Thatcher had to go back and make that bill appealing to all of her MPs, or at least the majority of them, if it was going to pass. So it's certainly doable, and I think it makes for better government.
Ms. Clark, I've been appalled that there hasn't been a single Conservative member of Parliament in British Columbia that's spoken out against the closing of the Kitsilano Coast Guard base. That's just one example. Would you tolerate one of your MLAs being adamantly opposed to a position that you've taken?
We had that happen in the last session of the legislature. One of our MLAs voted against the government on a bill or an amendment to a bill. That happens actually quite frequently.
What was that?
It was a bill. It was a forestry bill, I think, or an amendment in the forestry bill. And one of our members stood up and said he didn't support it. So fair enough. And that's been happening over the last few years. I've encouraged our MLAs to do that. Obviously, cabinet has to stand together. That's part of the parliamentary system. But MLAs are certainly allowed to voice their opinions on these things, and we encourage it. I mean, I think it was funny. I think it may have been the Tawasin Treaty where the NDP, Mr. Dix's group, kicked one of their members out for opposing what they wanted to do on it. And so, and we saw one of their members in the north get kicked out for speaking out against the leader in a very, very mild way. So, I mean, it's kind of this, they talk one thing and they say they're going to do another. It's really, and they actually end up doing another. It's the same old NDP that we saw in the 1990s. I don't think these guys have changed much.
Lynn, good morning.
Oh, hello, Bill. How are you doing?
Doing very well.
My question to the candidates there is, being that the Liberals have refused to do anything regarding people with disability benefits since 2005, except to improve those of people that can do some type of volunteer employment work, I want to know when they're going to improve the disability benefits and stop playing God with people's lives and putting them in jeopardy because they don't want to or they don't figure that their lives are worth worrying about.
What would you like to see them do?
Well, I would like to see them, I mean, right now, and I'm saying this honestly, I live off of the support part only. I'm not, because of the change in criteria to the eligibility for supplements, I don't come in that bracket. I am not employable, and whatever. And yet, I'm supposed to live off of that amount.
Lynn, what do you live on?
$531.42, and that's supposed to cover for food, clothing, transportation, laundry, and everything else under the sun. By the time you get finished doing everything, you're lucky if you get $150 to $200 a month to cover for proper nutritional food, which is supposed to be in accordance to the Canada Health Food Guide. Hello, what planet are we on? Get with reality. But these guys have ignored it since 2005, but they made damn sure in 2007 they got their 27 and 54% salary increase. I want to know when they're going to start treating us like human beings and not pieces of garbage.
Who wants to speak to that?
I'd like to speak to that because the Green Party is the only party that really would address issues of poverty that Lynn is talking about, and issues of dignity that Lynn is talking about, and an ability for someone to live a life of choice as opposed to one that forces them to stand in lines and to beg for things from our society. And the process we would go through is to create a commission to establish in British Columbia a guaranteed livable income. That would ensure that everyone is above the poverty line. And Conservative Senator Hugh Segal has done the best work on this to look at how we could coordinate all of the services that people have for income supplements, all of the services that people have from ministry. You know, they have to navigate so many ministries, and we could do it in an economic fashion, and it would lift everyone out of poverty. And then parallel to that, we create services for employment readiness, for parenting, for good housing, that would allow people to move themselves.
How do you pay for it?
we would pay for it out of the existing services. If you look at the enormous amount of services we pay in bureaucracies that police people like Lynn to prevent them from abusing the system. And if we look at all of the multiple small income assistance programs, we believe that if we looked at that and looked at the amount of money that's spent in that, $40,000 a year to keep a child in government care, all of those monies could be spent differently.
Bill, may I say something in my own defense here? Because I want to speak to Lynn directly on this. We are running in this campaign for people who have been spent their lives, who live in wheelchairs, who have spent their lives fighting for people with disabilities. Stephanie Cadieux in Surrey, Ken Kramer in Burnaby, Michelle Stilwell, a Paralympian in Parksville, and Sam Sullivan, of course, in Vancouver. 4 people who've devoted themselves to this cause, to Lynn's cause. But the question that you've asked is the right one. How do you pay for it? The only way you can pay to look after people and make sure that we have the money in this wealthy society to look after the people who need us is if we grow the economy. And so what I've been talking about is a plan to make sure we continue to grow our economy, control government spending, balance our budget, and get us on a path to eliminate our debt. You don't protect people with disabilities by spending $3 billion in 9 days, as Mr. Dix has done. All you end up doing is bankrupting the province and harming your ability to look after people.
How does growing the economy help a woman who's living on less than $600 a month and who is disabled? How does growing the economy help Lynn?
Because, Ms. Sterk, when we grow the economy, it provides revenue to government. Every penny that comes to government comes from a growing economy and a thriving private sector. That's where it comes from. Without those revenues, we end up where we were the last time Mr. Dix was in the Premier's office, which is a freeze on capital spending, running out of money to pay for the things that people care for, and massive deficits. That's what a shrinking economy and growing government gets you. You've got to grow the economy so you can increase the revenue to government, and that's what allows us to look after people.
Let me ask Mr. Dix about this, because I have heard you on a number of occasions saying that one of your priorities is to reduce the inequity, to try to make life a little bit more equitable. And I'm wondering how you do that other than raising taxes on people who are doing well in order to provide money for people not doing so well. I know that's a simplification, but is there a better answer than the one Ms. Clark gave, which is growing revenues for government in order to have more money to give to people who are in desperate need like Lynn?
Well, growing the economy is very important. Of course it is, and that's why it's unfortunate. We've lost 34,800 jobs since the government launched the jobs plan. I think there's 2 ways you have to address it. One is what I call the predistribution of wealth, giving people the skills to succeed in an economy. Right now, there's enormous barriers to people, both people with disabilities and others, getting access to the education, the post-secondary opportunities they need. You have to address that. It's not fair to say to someone that you don't have enough money at 18 and you can't get the skills you need to succeed your entire life. And that's what's going on now.
You know,
and
what
secondly, you have to deal with. Secondly, you have to deal with, I think, with the greatest respect, what we've done, which is put forward specific remedies to direct poverty. It's not right that children are living in poverty. It's not right that we've led the country in child poverty for 8 years and are second worst this year. It is not right. And so we want to take specific action to deal with it. Not big new social programs, but direct incomes with our BC Family Bonus to address that and lift people out of poverty. Because when you're in poverty at age 3, 4, or 5, it affects your whole life. And we need to address that now. I think waiting for LNG or whatever the Premier is waiting for to get on with that is the wrong approach. And that's why
I do want to remind people that we are live streaming this debate on our website. You can take it in online at CKNW.com. And Mr. Cummins, I want to come to you because you've worked as a fisherman. You worked on the WAC Bennett Dam. The kinds of jobs that we're talking about here, many of them are in the resource industries. Many of them are not in Metro Vancouver. They're throughout the province. So what would you do to as Ms. Clark says, grow the economy?
Well, I think that what we have to do is look at the resource sector of this province as starters, and that's where the action is right now. Unfortunately, the NDP is opposed to Kinder Morgan. They're opposed to Enbridge. They're opposed to coal exports. They don't want the Raven coal mine in Vancouver Island to go ahead. Opposed, apparently, to the Prosperity gold and copper mine and the Glacier Jumbo Resort.
Well, your government, your federal government, denied the Prosperity mine based on environmental review.
That's right, and I think what should have happened at that point is that the province should have stood up and made a lot of noise about it, because in my view, the rationale for opposing that Prosperity mine didn't hold water. And the only suggestion that the Premier had on it was that there should have been more consultation with local natives. The fact of the matter is that that consultation was ongoing and intensive right from the get-go. We have to move ahead with these sorts of natural resource extraction projects if we're going to realize prosperity in this province. That's one sector. We also have to look at high-tech sector. We're not doing enough, I think, in this province to encourage it, to allow it to grow and, in fact, continue. This morning in the Vancouver Sun, we see where another high-tech firm is shutting the doors in British Columbia. For what reason, I'm not sure. But we have to take an active interest in trying to grow these kinds of jobs. It's that sort of negativity, I think, that coming from Mr. Dix and others, that is going to discourage growth in the economy over the next number of years. But at the same time, I think what you have to look at is there has to be honesty and integrity in government. And Ms. Clark earlier suggested that somehow or another I was at fault for voting NDP in that last provincial election. What she seems to think is that I should have chosen a government that was deceitful, that was dishonest, and not telling the folks the truth over the friend that I actually voted for, who was a decent man. And that's the
choice. You could have voted Conservative, and you didn't.
I wasn't even aware that there was a Conservative on that ballot until I showed up at the voting booth. But I knew Mr. Gentner. I've known him for years. He's, as I say, a decent man and a friend. He got my vote because there was absolutely no way. But that was the choice that British Columbians were facing, is that choice between the deceit and dishonesty or the incompetence of an NDP government. And 20% of the people who voted Conservative in the 2008 federal election voted NDP in 2009 for that very same reason. They weren't going to give the Liberals a vote because they didn't trust them.
Bill, you know what I hear when I hear Mr. Dix talk about the pre-distribution of wealth? What I hear is that he wants to take away $1,200 from every child. It's got their name written on it for an RESP. Children that are just little kids today, to take that money away, suck it into government, and decide how he wants to spend it, because he's got a better idea about how to spend money than parents do, apparently. That's, I think, what he means about the pre-distribution of wealth. You take it away before they even have a chance to earn it.
Mr. Dix, on that particular question.
It's so disrespectful to say these things. The Premier is running an ad on Chinese radio that says, I'm taking money from children and giving it to my friends. I mean, it's completely wrong, and it shouldn't happen in politics. If you have nothing to say, I think you need to be a little bit more positive than that. What I say is we have to take those resources and ensure that children now, every penny of it goes to children now. Children living in poverty now, other children who are being denied early learning and childhood care opportunities. That's a difference of opinion. I don't disrespect the Premier's position. I think the Premier's position is her position. But for the Liberal Party to continue to run this kind of negative campaign, just to do attack, that may be what they think will win. And they've got very smart people running their campaign, I'm sure. But I think a more positive approach is necessary. And that's why I've said things like, and the Premier disagrees with this, I'm sure, that we should allow, especially people on income assistance and disability, to keep their child support and not have it clawed back penny for penny by the government.
Move on. Jim in Surrey, good morning.
Hi, Bill. My question is for Christy Clark. You keep saying that Adrian Dix is hiding the truth on things he hasn't been done yet, but I want to know the truth on your talking point of the balanced budget. You've balanced the budget. You've said it again and again and again. When many of the experts that Bill's had on this very show have said it's anything but balanced. As a matter of fact, you've doubled it. And I do not want to hear you quote what you may or may not do with the budget 15, 17, 20 years from now with proposed maybe natural gas resource revenues. I want to hear, how have you balanced the budget today? And I do want to comment from all of the people there, is the budget actually balanced or not? Thank you.
Ms. Clark.
Well, I know what all of the other people at the table will say. They'll agree with your caller, because that's the NDP talking point on the budget, that they want to kind of say, well, they don't have to balance the budget because nobody else has. Well, the fact is we have balanced the budget, and we've had 3 credit rating agencies come in. These aren't people who have a job that they hope to get out of this election campaign. These are people that said, we will not maintain your credit rating if your budget isn't balanced. They maintain our AAA credit rating, the best credit rating you can get in the world, and they would not have done that. And they said this, if we don't balance our budget. In fact, what they said was, if we don't maintain our fiscal discipline, which means if we don't balance our budget in the future in British Columbia, they will take away our credit rating. And so what some of them have expressed is very real worry about the statements that the Leader of the Opposition has made, where he says he doesn't intend to balance the budget. He would throw out the balanced budget law that will give him a pay cut. And he doesn't even say when, if ever, the budget would be balanced in British Columbia. Well, guess what? We're back to the 1990s, to the same old history, the same old gang, with all those same old credit rating downgrades that we saw.
But we will only have a balanced budget. We won't know for months, but we will only know if the revenue projections that you have predicted come true, if the sale of assets that you have announced that you will sell gets sold, and get sold at a price that gives you the revenue to balance the budget. So at the moment, you're proposing a balanced budget, but you don't have one.
But all 3 international credit rating agencies came in and they said it was a credible budget. The revenue projections in particular were ones that we had an outside expert come in, and we listened to him and we changed some of our revenue projections as a result. On the sale of assets, here's another big difference, is we had qualified public servants and experts go through for months real valuations of real properties that had real buyers, and we booked that in our budget. Compare that. Mr. Dix has criticized that up and down, negative all the way. And then today, or this week, he says, out of the blue, he wants to privatize BC Place. He doesn't know what it would be worth. He doesn't have a buyer for it. He's booked it in his budget. And he says somehow magically that's going to go to pay for his $3 billion worth of out-of-control spending.
But, Mr. Dix, the fact is that you have not promised to balance the budget. You have, in fact, said you wouldn't balance the budget for several years.
But the Premier, I mean, it's a good thing that your radio listeners generally have access to the Internet, because what the Premier asserted about what the credit rating agencies said, what the Premier has been asserting for days about what the credit rating agencies have said, is not in those reports. So I think we've pretty much established that. I think you established it a few days ago, and coming back to that doesn't make sense. We have to balance the budget, but you don't do it. You don't do it this way.
But you're not going to balance the budget this year, next year, or the year after.
By pretending you're selling assets. The Premier talks about asset sales. There's no list of asset sales. Last year, they booked the sale of Little Mountain for last year's budget. They said that the budget deficit was based on the sale of the Little Mountain project. They didn't sell it. So I think what Don Drummond has said, former chief economist, a major review for the Ontario government, said is that it's irresponsible. He said it's irresponsible to book asset sales to address issues such as balanced budgets. You deal with those issues over time. I think we need a more business-like government. I don't think it helps to pretend you have a balanced budget when they clearly don't. They clearly don't. No one in British Columbia believes it except the Premier. The credit rating agencies that are referred to simply didn't say what the Premier is saying. So, I mean, that's something that people will be able to judge, just as they can judge other issues. But what I say is, and why I know that we had to be prudent in our presentation of a platform, and we were, say every penny was going to come from, was we know we're inheriting a fiscal mess from the current Liberal government.
In the interest of fairness, I want to give Mr. Cummins and Ms. Sterk a chance to respond to both Ms. Clark and Mr. Dix.
And it would be interesting at some point if Mr. Dix could tell us when he plans to balance the budget, if indeed he does.
John Cummins.
Well, I think that to begin with, I think that claims that the budget was balanced in February are simply inaccurate. You don't balance a budget by a fire sale of government assets. And secondly, Dominion Bond Rating Service and Moody's did not say that that the BC budget was balanced. In fact, if you read the Dominion Bond Rating Service report, it will tell you that it considers BC to be running deficits in 2013-14 and 2014-15. Those are the facts. And to suggest somehow that that bringing in this balanced budget legislation has any meaning at all is simply to deny history. As I've said earlier in the program, NDP governments, social credit governments before it, NDP governments, and Liberal governments have brought in this balanced budget legislation. They have not kept their word. There have been penalties for ministers if they didn't balance the books. They didn't keep their word. All that happens is the government changes the legislation to allow them to run one more deficit.
Ms. Sterk.
We all know that this is an election budget, and that's one of the reasons that we need to move the election to the fall, because every election year we have this magical budget that is put forward by the government. The NDP, as far as I can tell, I don't see the numbers for revenue, but as far as I can tell, they've used the BC Liberal numbers for resource revenue and income tax revenue. The only thing they haven't used is the sale of asset revenue. So we have this game that's played every election where we bring in a so-called magical budget that's going to be wonderful for British Columbia. It happened in 2009. They predicted a deficit of $500 million, and we ended up with a $2.5 billion deficit, which is what the Green Party said in February of 2009. Looks like a big deficit to us, $2 to $2.5 billion. We were thought to be crazy people, and in fact, it turned out that it was an election budget, just as this one is. It has no reality base. As soon as the election's over, whoever is in government is going to say, oops, the books are way different than we imagined, and so we can't do anything that we've promised.
When we talk about asset sales, I want to come back to something that just came out this week. Mr. Dix, your suggestion that you would either privatize or perhaps even sell BC Place and the Trade and Convention Centre. I'm wondering why, if selling assets like BC Rail is such a bad thing, it suddenly becomes a good thing to sell something like BC Place or the Trade and Convention Centre. Both went over budget in their build, but they're both tremendous assets for the province.
Well, they're both assets for the province, but the tools that we're supposed to use to pay for them fell through. As you know, the Premier's office bungled the naming rights issue and cost us $40 million. And then they mishandled the gaming issue, and it cost that project again. So I think we got to use common sense on these things. I think we need to focus on the fundamentals right now, which are healthcare, public education, ensuring that young people have the skills they need for the jobs of the future, ensuring the health of our forests. And so those are the priorities. And retractable roofs, right, and stadium management are not. But here's the difference. We are not doing what the government is doing, which is selling assets to pretend they have a balanced budget in an election year. If there's a sale of BC Place, every penny will go to pay down the enormous debt caused by the overruns of the current government.
John Cummins.
Well, this whole notion of the sale of BC Place is somewhat mystifying. If you look at PAVCO, their subsidy is $9 million a year. They're expected to lose $17 million a year. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the breakdown is between BC Place and the Convention Centre, but clearly there's huge debt associated with both of those entities. They're not making money, and to suggest that you're going to sell money-losing entities says to me that it's going to be a fire sale.
They don't make money, but they generate a lot of revenue for the province and for restaurants, hotels, businesses all around.
But somebody that's going to buy them is not going to buy them so they can subsidize the restaurants and the other businesses.
Right.
They're going to buy them because it's a money-making operation, and it's not. What I think we need to do here is encourage PAVCO to become at least a break-even operation.
Bill, here's what we have here. We have an NDP led by Mr. Dix who bitterly criticized the government sale of surplus assets, so empty land in Surrey that's not going to any economic use, as just one example. And then, on the same day they launch their platform, they say, we want to privatize BC Place, like it's somehow magically going to cover up, going to pay for their $3 billion in out-of-control spending that they've already promised. The fact is it isn't. And I believe the reason that they launched it on the same day as their platform is they don't want anybody to really look at their platform. Again, it's another example of concealing where they stand and not wanting British Columbians to really know what it is they're going to do after the election when they go and vote. It's the same old NDP, same old tricks, and the same old policies.
Mike, good morning in Surrey.
Good morning, Bill. I'd like to ask Adrian Dix there is about freedom of information requests. Under Ms. Clark, there they seem to be going up and up and up and no information coming out. Talking about PASCO there is, I think the fellow he does works for you guys sometimes, Macklin or whatever, put in a ton of requests.
Bob Macklin.
They can't get any requests. Now they're going to let them out after the election. Two of her Ms. Clark's candidates sit on that board, and they still can't get information out. Are they going to make it easier for the public to get this information that is actually our information?
Mr. Dix.
Absolutely. As you know, the NDP brought in the Freedom of Information and Privacy Act to the credit of the Liberal Party and the legislature at the time. They supported that effort. I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's very unfortunate at the BC Pavilion Corporation that they consistently resist access to information by Mr. Mackin and others. And we have to change that. And we have to ensure in the Premier's office and everywhere else that government business that takes place in the government takes place on government email systems so that we can have freedom of information requests and get the responses we need. I think a respect and an openness of government is important. I think that sometimes the approach of the current government has been that there's something that we have something to lose in being open. I think we need to change that, and we would. And another key part of being open is to, as I've said earlier, having fall and spring sessions of the legislature. I mean, the Premier surely can't defend only having the legislature sit 19 days and then not providing responses to legitimate freedom of information requests.
And I would ask this, Mr. Dix, you were in the Premier's office under Glenn Clark. Was the Premier's office open then? Did you conceal information then when you were there? And could we expect that same pattern of behavior if you were elected to run the Premier's office again?
Well, the Liberal government has been in power for 12 years. And we have, I think what I've demonstrated in my years is an openness and a generosity that we need more of in politics. Last year I said I wasn't going to respond to personal attacks from the Premier and her party, personal attacks with personal attacks of my own. And I haven't, because I think that's the right approach. That's learning in politics, and that's what we've done. And I think we have to, from my way of thinking, the Premier didn't respond, of course, to the question of why we've only been sitting for 19 days in the last year. I think they've been campaigning all the time when they should have been governing, and that's plain from what we've seen from the Premier's office. But we need to change that. We need a serious government that gets down and works on the serious issues facing the province.
Jody,
that's
good
what I
morning.
intend to do.
Jody, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My concern is our BC seniors and the lack of residential care beds. The Liberal government promised them 7,000 beds years ago. Where are they? The seniors are being housed in acute beds, huge wait lists for appropriate facilities for them. And once they're there, there's insufficient staffing levels. Some nursing aides have 15 minutes per resident to feed, bathe, dress, and no time for niceties or quality care. I understand the Liberals have appointed a seniors advocate, but my question is, why on earth is it not independent of the Cabinet and the health ministries?
Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Bill. Well, thank you for the question. We have appointed a seniors advocate, and we've appointed a Minister of State for Seniors in Ralph Sultan, who's done a great job. We have lowered the cost of generic drugs for seniors. We are going to double the number of hospice beds in British Columbia, which is an issue that's very close to my heart because my mom spent the last week of her life in a hospice in Vancouver, and it was an incredible gift for all of us. We need to keep investing in healthcare. We have doubled in the last 12 years. The budget for healthcare has more than doubled. So there's been a huge investment, and it's been a good investment in seniors' care and in the people of the province. But ask yourself how we can do this. We can do that. We can build a new hospital in Surrey. We can build a new build new wings to the hospital at VGH and at St. Paul's. We can start contemplating what we need to do in Burnaby. We can do that because we are growing the economy and growing revenues to government. The only way government can look after people is if we continue to grow the economy. And you think about the threat that the NDP poses to that. Growing government, shrinking the economy, sending our kids to Alberta to try and find jobs. We are going to run out of money pretty quick. They've already said that they want to put a freeze on capital projects. No more hospitals, no more schools, no more roads to pay for their out-of-control spending.
I want to ask you a specific question about health care.
Yes.
You have cut the funding for the Therapeutic Initiative, an independent review of pharmaceuticals that Mr. Dix has said the NDP would continue to fund. Why did you decide to defund or stop funding that initiative?
Well, it was a decision of government.
$1 million a year.
Well, trying to make sure that we're running our healthcare, it's a complicated system, and trying to make sure that we are managing the cost of drugs as best we can and respecting the private sector at the same time. So, we have gone out and since I became premier, we have lowered the cost of generic drugs for seniors. And we've done that by working hard with the pharmacies that provide those drugs and making sure that seniors get a better deal. So we're finding other ways to achieve those same ends. And again, it's trying to make sure that we are running government in a business-like manner, that we are supporting an economy that's growing, that's going to pay for the things that we need, and then making the right decisions in government and to try and find the right means to the right ends that we want to
But
find.
who benefits from cutting the therapeutic initiative?
She just said who benefits. It's the private sector. And it's the pharmaceutical companies. And essentially what this government is doing is taking independent research into the effectiveness of drugs out of the therapeutics initiative, which is at UBC, independent of pharmaceutical companies, and giving it to industry to say our drugs are safe. I mean, it's an absolutely ludicrous decision. And to not fund the therapeutics initiative is a betrayal of the people of British Columbia, because we need that kind of independent research into the pharmaceuticals, which can be very, very dangerous to people if not used properly.
Definitive difference between the NDP position and the Liberal position.
It's absolutely different. And the therapeutics initiative has saved lives in British Columbia. This is indisputable, and saved enormous amount of money. It's been targeted because it provides a conflict-free, so no conflict of interest with the big pharmaceutical companies, source of advice. And the Liberal government has cut it and attacked it, and then now is eliminating the funding. We'd go in a different direction. We'd restore its role in the drug review process because we think that people deserve right to independent information. We'd restore its role in the drug review process, and we'd reinstate its funding. In fact, we'd add to its funding to ensure that its purposes, which is to save lives, to protect British Columbians, to improve prescribing, which also saves money, and to save money for the pharmacare program, are put in place. These kind of decisions by the Liberal government cost the government money, but more importantly, they hurt patients.
Mr. Cummins, do you have a position?
Well, I think that cutting the therapeutic initiative was simply the wrong thing to do. It's typical of this government. They're not looking at the real issues here. Travel the province, talk to seniors, and you'll find that throughout the province there is a real issue about seniors' care. And it hasn't been addressed by the government. To simply keep turning the clock back and saying, what did you do 12 years ago, doesn't cut it. This Liberal government has been in place for a dozen years. They have not been open. We've got on PAVCO, Peter Fassbender, the Liberal candidate in Surrey, is the chairman of that board. Susan Anton sits on that board. Why would these Liberal candidates not ensure that PAVCO and its operation was made public? It's because it's not in their best interest to do so, and it reflects on the party when the party has candidates that won't make the operation of PAVCO public.
George in Surrey.
Yeah, I got a question here for all your candidates. I'd like to hear each one answer independently. We have a serious duplication of services throughout the Lower Mainland, and by this I'm talking all the different cities that we have. It made sense when the areas were created because our borders were not pushed up against each other. But today our population density has grown to a point where it doesn't make sense to have all these little cities in and around here anymore. Let's take White Rock, for example. They're 3 square miles, yet they have their own mayor, councillors, city managers, fire chiefs, and all that duplication is certain.
George, I'm going to have to cut you short because we've got very limited time left. Do any of you have any definitive ideas about amalgamation, whether or not it makes sense?
Well, there are things that we can do to make municipal government work better. I brought in the local government auditor general, which is going to go out and do the same thing that the auditor general does for the province and the federal government. Make sure that we are getting real value for money as taxpayers from local government. And that's going to shine a light on some of the things that he's concerned about. And then we can also make sure that we are doing things like mobile business licenses so that small businesses, when they move around, you're a contractor, you might have your operation in Burnaby, but you're in Richmond, you're in Vancouver, you're in Coquitlam. Let's work on making sure that we have a similar structure for those kinds of business licenses across the Lower Mainland. Those are the kinds of things that we can do, that we should do, and I think those are the kinds of things that local government would be happy to work with us on doing as well.
Mr. Dix.
Well, I think one of the things we have to do with local government is stop downloading obligations and responsibilities, which has consistently happened over the last number of years. We have to bring a stop to that. Part of the challenge with local governments, one of the things it does well, is that it responds directly to people. People come to the council meeting, and we got to stop downloading on them. On these issues of amalgamation, we've looked at this, and we're looking at this in Victoria, which would be a good example of giving people the choice on the ballot to decide on these issues, both on issues of policing and amalgamation, more choice in terms of the decision they'd like to make. But ultimately, it's people and communities that should make these decisions, not the Premier.
We're down to our final minutes, and it is time for each of you to present your closing argument or statement, position, and we'll start in reverse order to what we began the program with. Jane Sterk.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, the listeners who have participated in this, and I'm sure there were other people that wanted to participate that didn't get an opportunity. I think we've had a microcosm here of what we see in the legislature, a belief that we can only have a two-party system. It's kind of crazy-making on one side because in many ways these two parties agree on a lot of issues, and yet they pretend there is no source of agreement. I hear an impoverishment of ideas, a future that's based in the past, that all we can do is dig up British Columbia, sell it at fire sale prices to the Asia Pacific, and that will be an economy that will be good and sustainable for the long term. I see a lack of imagination in these parties, and I see that this future based on a past that we know is simply not going to be sustainable. We won't have cheap fossil fuels forever. We cannot fuel our economy by debt, and we cannot expand it beyond the limits of what this earth can take.
Mr. Dix.
And so the Green Party is the only party of change.
Thanks, Bill. I want to thank you. I want to thank your listeners. I want to thank Premier Clark and Mr. Cummins and Ms. Sterk for their participation today. They're all good people. I think the people running this election and their candidates are all good people. And people are running to put forward their ideas. And that's what this election should be about. I think for me, the choice is clear. Do we want more of the same of the government we've had, or do we want to change for the better? I believe we can have a government that focuses in on the issues of today, the key issues, ensuring we create jobs, ensuring that young people have the skills they need for the jobs of the future, addressing issues of poverty with real programs and real ideas, and ensuring that we protect our precious environment. That's change for the better, one practical step at a time. Thank you. I ask for people's support.
John Cummins.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thank your listeners, and I certainly appreciate my fellow leaders this morning. Let me just say this. The tax and spend policies of both the Liberals and the NDP over the past 20 years have made things more difficult here in British Columbia. People are losing their jobs and moving out of the province. Spending is out of control, and both the Liberals and the NDP have track records of doubling the debt. Taxes keep going up, and families continue to shoulder the burden. What this province needs isn't some fancy, expensive TV advertisements, nor a party that will raise every tax in sight. British Columbia needs a steady leader who will get BC back to basics by balancing the budget, spending smarter, and scrapping the carbon tax. So on May 14th, please vote BC Conservative. Let's make BC great again for our seniors, our families, and our children, for the future of BC.
Ms. Clark.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you to Ms. Sterk, Mr. Dix, and Mr. Cummins. And most of all, thank you to all the listeners for joining us today. This is an important debate because this is one of the most important elections that British Columbia has faced in decades. And it matters for the future of every British Columbia child and grandchild today. And this is why I've been traveling around the province for the last couple of years, talking to people, hearing what it is that they're most concerned about, what are their hopes and dreams for the province. And I've been so impressed by the entrepreneurial spirit and the get up and go you see in every corner of this province. That is what has built British Columbia. It's been entrepreneurial spirit. It's been people. It hasn't been government that's built British Columbia. It's been people. And that's why I believe in growing the economy, getting out of the way of people who want to dream and imagine and create, because that's what's going to build our province. We need to grow the economy. We need to shrink government. And that's why I hope people will consider supporting me and today's BC Liberals on May 14th on Election Day. Thank you, Bill.
My thanks to all of the candidates and to you for your participation. I'm Bill Good. Thank you for listening. The news is next on the Chorus Radio Network.
Right now, get a quality, reliable Honda Civic DX for just $95 bi-weekly with zero down. Great news. The only problem is that you're likely in your car. For your personal safety, please refrain from in-vehicle belly bumping, backflipping,